Hey everyone, and welcome to The Index, brought to you by The Graph, where we talk with the entrepreneurs building the next wave of the internet, Web3. I'm your host, Alex Kehaya, and on today's episode of The Index, I'm excited to welcome Diego Perez de Ayala, managing partner of Frictionless Capital. Their investment endeavors revolve around next-gen blockchains and dApps within the Web3 ecosystem, engineered to support the next billion users. Diego, thanks so much for being on the show. For those of you listening, you might know Diego as Solana Legend on Twitter. He's been a huge advocate for the Solana ecosystem, and I'm just super excited to hear more of your story. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me on.
So maybe just to start out, tell me more about who you are and how you got to be working in the space that we're in now.
Sure. I went the traditional finance route. I studied finance and applied economics at Cornell. I took a job in investment banking. I worked in M&A for almost 4 years. And I guess typical experience, right? I was doing Excel and PowerPoint for 16 hours a day.
Yeah.
Did a bunch of M&A transactions. It was an intense period of my life. I think it gave me a good background in terms of hard skills, a background in investing, capital markets, kind of like formed me as a professional. But ultimately, I always had one foot in the internet sphere. So I tell people I kind of grew up on the internet. I was watching YouTube since the platform came out, played a ton of video games, MMOs, spent a lot of time in internet communities in general, right? I played more hours of RuneScape and World of Warcraft than I'd like care to admit on a show like this. But
Yeah.
honestly, a lot of the people in the industry did as well, right? And whether it's collecting Magic the Gathering cards or playing these video games, we kind of all live the same life differently, which is what I joke about. But it was through MMOs actually that I made my first crypto transaction in 2013. So I kind of discovered Bitcoin when I was in high school through gaming. I held a little bit of Bitcoin, kind of kept with it. I bought some ETH as well later on. I was pretty much a passive holder of crypto, more of an observer. But during COVID, I was working from home. I had a lot of time to just go deep on this stuff. And I was completely enthralled by what I was seeing and what I was reading. I was early to Solana. I discovered the chain early on. And I realized the world and the scope of what was being built was just way broader than what people realize. As soon as I peeked behind the curtain, I realized there's giant applications and platforms, and some of the smartest people in the world are working on this stuff. So at that point, I was kind of hooked. But that's initially how I got into the space.
And tell me more about that though. Let's dig into that a little bit. Like, why were you so hooked? What was the thing that inspired you so much about Solana and in general, just like the Web3 space?
Yeah, I came at the space from a slightly different angle than most people, right? The traditional like crypto investor, got involved maybe in Bitcoin and then Ethereum, and then kind of went from there. Maybe they had bags in both. I'm relatively younger. I didn't really have a lot of bags of Bitcoin or ETH. So I came at things not from the angle of like a bag holder or someone who had a preconceived bias, more of like a user. I messed around with Ethereum, did transactions, played with DeFi. It didn't feel like the future of France. I'm not going to lie to you. Like I came at it much more from an end user perspective. I was looking at it and I was saying, look, objectively, this is a terrible user experience. I was accustomed to Web 2 platforms. This was not even close, not even the same universe of performance. And then when I used Solana, it felt like fiber optics, right? It felt like going from dial up to broadband and then fiber optics. And I think that was the light bulb moment for me where I said, look, if you can have a blockchain that has thousands of distributed nodes geographically, and it has this kind of performance, just instant feedback, there's it's kind of hard to argue that kind of user experience is not going to be just superior over time, right? Like good applications by definition, they have low latency, they're performant, they're fast, they're cheap. And I think betting on those different variables, right? Faster, cheaper, just instant feedback, that's just more in line with the world we're living in today.
Let's pause for a second. Your camera has like a big glare on it. Do you think you can like move around in the room or something? Or can you see that? I can see it on my end. It like went away briefly, but I just don't want the camera footage to be, see now it kind of goes away when I think it's a window open or something. That's better.
Yeah, sorry, man. I'm happy to like restart it as well if you want.
No, it's good. We'll just keep going. But yeah, just keep your camera straight like this, because the glare is good. And I think it was there was like just a light coming in from the side. So yeah, you were saying, let's pick back up. So you were saying like the performance of the network, unmatched, and you can't build. There's just like a certain, like in ETH, you just can't build experiences like that. The UX just doesn't work out. And I experienced that the similar thing. I mean, I talked about with Logan, your partner, just like the example of dial-up versus like high-speed internet, and having, I was born in '86, right? So I'm 37. So I didn't have a computer until the '90s, and I remember dial-up, and I remember the ringtone, it taking forever to like actually make a connection. And I also remember the first time I sent a transaction on ETH with any kind of like meaningful, at least for me, money, and just like sweating bullets. Like, is it going to get there? Yeah. And then it finally shows up, and but with Solana, it was like night and day. First of all, Phantom's UX is just was so good, and it's still pretty good, and then just instant transaction speeds. And then you think about what that makes possible, and things like compressed NFTs and stuff. And I think there are other chains too out there that are trying to push the envelope there, and I'm excited to see that. I'd be curious to like hear from you. What are you seeing that's exciting right now? I mean, it's a bear market, sentiment's down, but typically I think this is actually some of the best times to build. So I'm curious what you're seeing in this market that you're excited about.
Yeah, the landscape is super interesting. I mean, just at a like surface level or maybe at the financial level, there are networks and protocols and applications and infrastructure that have only improved over the last 2 years, but they're priced cheaper than ever. So I think there's an insane amount of like deep value in liquid markets. People, I'd say most investors are not particularly nuanced on the tech. Many VCs, say they're technical, but they don't really know how to talk about this stuff from first principles. I think there's, unfortunately a situation where a lot of the fundamentals have gone out the window just because the macro picture is just so has been so horrendous for the last year and a half. But overall, there's incredibly exciting projects. And I think people always ask me this, even on Twitter. They're like, what's the next big thing? What's going to be the next theme or narrative of next cycle? And truly, it's in times like these where innovation happens, right? Real innovation, where new primitives, new businesses, new applications get created. And these are some of the kind of main characters of the next run, right? And I think it happens time and time again. People kind of run with those 2021 narratives and themes until they're completely exhausted and dead. And then new ones rise from the ashes, right? And they kind of like lead the next run. So I think we're squarely in that point of the market. I think next generation blockchains with parallel processing, high data propagation, minimal fees are incredibly exciting. I think that's where developers and users will find the biggest sandbox of experiences and things to build. And that's what we're investing in exclusively at Frictionless. We are so high conviction on this. We're not going to invest in any legacy-based technology. So I think on that side, infrastructure is still very exciting. There's massive projects like FireDancer being built that I think are not only one of the top projects on Solana, but one of the top engineering projects in all of crypto. And I think people don't talk about them enough, but even stuff that's off-chain that's still in the industry, right? Centralized exchange business, I think, is wide open. There's room for new entrants. I think that's a very, very proven business model, one of the most like established. So we're excited for a lot of different stuff. But really, it's just the innovation and things like Backpack, X NFTs, compressed NFTs you mentioned, just new experiences, new primitives that have never existed before.
Yeah, like Bart, I mean, on the exchange front, you make a really good point. Like, known business model, but tons of innovation needed, especially in the wake of FTX. And you look at Cube, which is Bartaj's new project, that's taking a lot of that stuff that happened in a centralized environment and keeping it on chain and keeping it more transparent, and doing things with custody that are really interesting. So you can self-custody your assets. I mean, that was the big issue with FTX. They, not your keys, not your coins, right? Yeah, and I think you're making me think about a couple of things. I mean, one is the reason why I love doing this show is because I like connecting people and I like telling their stories. And I'm really interested in telling those stories, the ones that other people are not going to see necessarily if they're not really paying attention and steeped in the industry. And it makes me think about back in like 2018, I think it was around 2018, whenever we were like close to the bottom of that bear market, that was after the big ICO boom. I was at ETH Denver and I walked up to the third floor and they had this art gallery, and like the ETH community is like, yeah, definitely artsy, a lot of culture in that ecosystem. And so I was not surprised that there was art. Like I had been to a bunch of these things where there was art, but they had this whole room dedicated to this thing called NFTs. And I was like, what is that? And I bought, there was this 8-year-old who made this really cool Bufficorn that was animated, and her dad was like the top selling artist on Super Rare, and Super Rare was like 2 guys, like literally like 2 or 3 people on the team at the time. I can't remember exactly the date, but that was before anybody knew. It was like 12 months after that when NFTs started blowing up. It took a while. And it's funny, as like an investor, as an entrepreneur, somebody in the space, you kind of get the most important thing I think is pattern recognition. Like when you have that feeling, you're like, wait, this is something different. You got to start digging in a little further. Like at the time I didn't dig into NFTs, but I was like, oh, this is something struck me and I didn't quite register it. With Solana, I saw it. Like Solana, I saw it in the people that were behind building the project. And that was back, very early before they had mainnet launched. I'm curious, like, are there entrepreneurs or specific people you see building stuff right now that maybe people haven't heard of that you are open to sharing, like what they're working on, or some exciting things that might be that insight people are looking for?
Maybe not the ones that are kind of more in stealth, but I mean, people have talked quite a bit about Backpack, but I still think there's a big information gap between the magnitude of like what these guys are building versus what people and their understanding is. I think Armani and team are doing something super special with X NFTs. I mean, this is truly one of the most creative and innovative projects I've ever seen. We're very, very like fortunate to back them. But I think just generally X NFTs are an absolute like canvas where you can paint almost anything. I mean, just the concept of tokenized code. Why hasn't someone done this before? Why it just blows your mind. I mean, I think you spoke about wallets too, Phantom. Truly, like the end state of wallets, right, doesn't look anything like Phantom or MetaMask. Private keys won't be held at the application level. They'll be on your phone. They'll be in a secure hardware enclave similar to Saga, right? And I think Armani, the reason why I give him so much props is because he's building for a future that doesn't exist, but is going to 100% exist one day. And I think that level of foresight of a building like what essentially amounts to a cross-chain operating system, which today looks like a wallet, is absolutely insane and mind-breaking. I mean, just iOS itself, right? It proved that interacting with apps natively is just the easiest way for consumers to do it. And in many ways, crypto feels like Web 1. You've got all these different websites. You have to go to
100%
one website to another. It's like, it feels like those web portals. It feels like early internet days, but for crypto all over again. And crypto is about to go into like its Web 2 era of like mobile apps and a much higher degree of just usability than has ever existed in the past.
Well, I think Armani's a perfect example, and actually we had him on the show recently. I think his episode is going to come out soon. So if you're listening to this episode and you don't know who he is and you want to hear his story straight from him, you should definitely check that one out. But X NFTs are a huge innovation, and it took me a pretty long time to wrap my head around it, like to really understand it. But the way I look at it is it's tokenized code. It's like a website that is tradable, and that gives you, I think your example of native interaction on a phone with an application is a really good one. And for like less technical folks listening, when the iPhone first came out, all the apps you used, if you used any, were on websites. And you could go on Chrome right now and interact with a bunch of different web applications from Chrome on your phone, and it's not going to be that great of an experience. It's like kind of wonky. But as soon as you download the same app, like Gmail, all of a sudden it's got like all these bells and whistles, and the user experience is like way, way better. And this is kind of what Diego's talking about. Like X NFTs are the thing that ties everything together in a native experience. It's the technology that allows that, and it didn't exist before. And it's a simple idea. And the thing that I love about it too, it's simultaneously like great vision from Armani, but it's also repeating what we have seen in the past work really, really well. Which I think is kind of, if you're an entrepreneur, like looking for what to build right now, and you can actually look at the evolution of Web 1 to Web 2 and start thinking, what's missing that needs to exist that this technology can allow? Like, where's the combination of this new technology plus what already worked? I also want to say this, and I mean this in the best way possible. I think you and Logan are like kind of, as fund managers, just from having like talked with Logan and now you a bunch, are, you're a smaller fund, like from my understanding, like first time fund managers. I think that you have some insights into the industry that other people don't. And I think the next cycle, like people are going to know who you are, like that's another reason why I wanted to have you on the show. Like, I think you guys are going to do really well and have a lot of your, I just agree with a lot of your theses. So again, if you're listening to this, you should probably follow Solana Legend, go follow Logan, and keep track of what they're saying, because there's gold in them hills. So
For sure. Thanks a lot, Alex. I appreciate it. And honestly, our point of view is pretty contrarian today, but make no mistake, I think this is 100% where the industry is headed. And I think all of this is just a result of the first principles thinking that Logan and I have done. We've done a few years of research prior to starting the fund, and we've boiled down blockchain to their core fundamental building blocks. We cut out all noise, all narratives, all the themes, all the kind of smoke and mirrors that exists in the air. And we're just breaking it down. We're comparing the tech apples to apples. And we're just like, look, physically at the engineering level, what needs to happen for blockchains to scale to mass adoption? And as it turns out, the path is pretty clear. It's not like a highly debatable topic where, you ask 100 people and you get 100 different answers. Like, there is, objectively better way to scale blockchains. And I think once you kind of find that North Star of, identifying the chains that are going to scale the fastest, then you really just cut down the entire blockchain industry to just a few chains that are taking this approach, right? And those are the only ones we're investing in, whether it's the infrastructure itself or the applications built on top. And I think cutting through all that noise and just having an extremely pinpointed view of the tech is what's allowed us to just go extremely deep. I don't have to spend time in 20 different ecosystems, or I just need to drill into the ones that are actually going to scale, right? And I think getting that ecosystem presence and really just focusing 100% of our time on the tech that scales the hardest, I think is kind of like funny when we talk to people and they tell us that we don't need all this block space, right? And that the blocks aren't even full and we won't need that much data propagation and performance isn't that important. And it's kind of like arguing you didn't need broadband, you could just stay on dial-up, right? It's kind of like a bad argument. And it's one that demonstrates just a fundamental lack of foresight, because people are always asking us, like, what's the killer app? What's the chat GPT of crypto? What's the first, crypto application with global scale and users? And I'd say arguably It's not an application, but stablecoins themselves are a fantastic product. But aside from that, people keep asking why these applications don't exist. And we're kind of just like, because the infrastructure hasn't been supportive. Like, I'll throw a hypothetical, right, Alex? Imagine we had $30 million in funding and we had to build a global application, right, on the level of Pokemon Go, something that got 1 billion downloads and hundreds of millions of concurrent users or monthly users. And the tech stack that we're working with was something like Ethereum, right? We had 10-minute confirmation times, block times are 12 seconds, gas fees anywhere from $5 to $500. What kind of killer app can you build with that tech?
Yep, 100% agree with you. And I think it's a great analogy. And I think about my experience building the Olaplex and working with other founders in the space. And like, we have had to invent the wheel so many times, or reinvent the wheel rather, because just stuff didn't exist, like basic infrastructure, like indexing. And now that stuff's a lot more mature on Solana over the last 2 years. Like the pace of maturity for an ecosystem like Solana especially has been kind of breakneck pace. And I think, a lot of people asking those questions, like maybe they don't have the experience yet about what are all the different building blocks in the infrastructure layer that actually need to exist for an ecosystem to function and for apps to be buildable, right? You need good RPC providers. You need indexing. You don't just need the blockchain, right? You need developer tools that sit on top of that. I think a big hypothesis I have at the enterprise level is that you need tools that are Web3 tools that feel like Web2 tools, that like they're just used to these Web2 APIs they can hit and build apps that scale. They don't have to worry about, how do I construct a transaction? Like, how do I make this thing efficient on chain? They just consume APIs. And I think like all that infrastructure is being built in our space, but it still has a ways to go. Yeah. So I agree with you. One question I want to ask you is like, what do you think is like the aspirational why behind Web3? Like, why does this matter for people that are listening to this show who aren't us? Like, we care about the tech. We see what the benefits are of Web3, but why, for people who are not in this space, like, why does this space matter at all? Why should they care about what's being built?
I'll answer this in the simplest way I know, which is to say that Bitcoin changed the world forever. And I think it introduced the concept of self-sovereignty and self-custody. And it solved the double spend problem, and it did a lot of other fantastic things. But at its core, crypto is about people owning their own destiny, whether they're creators, whether they want to own their own assets. They actually want to own them, not in a fractional reserve banking system where your money isn't even there. So here's the problem. As great as all those things were that Bitcoin introduced, you can't take those wonders and those properties and that magic of self-custody and even tokenization and smart contracts from Ethereum. You can't take those to the masses without a chain like Solana, because they're the only ones that are scalable. So we've had 3 steps. We had the Gen 0 with Bitcoin, and created the concept of blockchain, the philosophical foundation for all of this. Then we had an improvement with Ethereum. They brought smart contracts, programmability, and just vastly increased the scope of what can be built. But now we're going to take it to the 3rd step, which is building on those 2 steps. Now we're going to make it scalable. And that's exactly what chains like Solana are doing. And why are we here? Because we're here to scale and take these wonders of composability, interoperability, all these things that are great and amazing about blockchains. We're going to take them to billions of people via applications, via products, via platforms, multi-sided platforms, all of it.
Empowering billions of people to control their destiny. And I smiled when you said that, because that's literally Olaplex's tagline, is control your destiny. And it's the why behind why I'm building in this space, is because I believe that the true power of our space of Web3 is enabling individuals, brands, enterprises, entire cultures to control their destiny. Because the way that the world is organized right now that your destiny is in large part controlled by other people. I mean, I think that you have freedom of choice and everything like that, but your money sits in a bank that you don't control. It sits in a bank account. The software you use is probably closed source, and it runs on centralized, data aggregators that like gather all your data. I mean, we know the narrative. You and I know the narrative, and I think a lot of people know the narrative that like Google and Facebook, they own all the channels for customer relationships, right? Like no brand can survive forever when you don't control your relationship. Things like wallets running on open source software on open permissionless blockchains, that's how you get control back. Individual customers have access to their own cash, their own resources, their own assets through self-custody. And then because they carry that with them, brands can access them, enterprises can access them, other people can access them in whatever ecosystem they're a part of. And I think, I don't know, it's kind of a hard thing to break down, but it's so fundamental and important. And I think there's one thing I would like to see change in the Solana ecosystem and in the ecosystem in general is I would love to see more and more open source software like full stack, just because I think it's so important. It's such an important aspect of the idea of being able to control your own destiny. Like everything I build is open source because I want the people who use it to have that control. I also just don't believe it's that important to be closed source. Like I think that that's not as big of a strategic advantage that people think it is. Like SaaS, in this closed source SaaS world, like people get out executed on closed source SaaS products all the time. Right. It's got really nothing to do with whether it was open source or not, that they got their whole business model copied. So yeah, we align a lot. We align really well on that topic for sure. So what's next for you? Like, I mean, you've been in the space for a while. You've got the fund. I know you've been like really active in NFTs, but like what's coming up next for you in the near term? Like, what are your goals, and how can anybody listening participate in helping you succeed?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of tell people I'm in my post NFT phase. I had a crazy summer in 2021, as many did. I minted Solana Monkey Business. I went down the line, and I grew my Twitter very rapidly. Right, I think I got 100,000 followers in my first 6 months. But purely, I was so involved with NFTs, not because that's like the scope of what I'm interested in. That was truly and honestly, if you're a person on the ground floor of one of these ecosystems, that was the biggest thing happening, right? So I immersed myself completely in that movement. And I think what's missing a little bit in this space is investors that can do exactly that, right? They can sit on the ground floor of an ecosystem and they can be tapped in, not, 2, 3, 4, 5 levels removed, but actually, right there with the users, with the people building the tech and using it directly. And I think a lot of times, perhaps I gave VC investors a little bit too much credit. A lot of people, really just don't even use crypto or, are just not that involved. They kind of just play the manager game, which I understand. But Logan and I are truly seeking to be the most value-add investors in crypto. Like when we back founders, the ticket is just the starting point, right? We're trying to go the distance, and we're trying to just actively help them as much as possible. And I think what's next for me is honestly that, like you'll see Frictionless backing the top companies in the space, and you'll see us working very, very closely with founders to make their visions reality. That's the ultimate way I want to play the game. That's what I want to do for the rest of my life. So truly and honestly, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see us partnering with top tier companies, whether those are platforms, infrastructure, applications, and really just trying to get this tech into the hands of billions of people.
I mean, I can speak from experience to how important it is to have people on your cap table who are willing to go to bat for you, right? Like, I mean, when times are good and when times are bad, that they invest like a lot of time and energy in the companies in their portfolio. I Coin Fund was the lead in my last round, and they have been absolutely amazing. Like, good or bad, they jump right in and try to help us solve problems, because building companies are hard, and like they're really invested in your success. And so are basically everybody that I took money from has been helpful at one point or another. It's also really helped to have, to your point, like there's people who are actually users and involved in the space. I think there's also people who are that and have built companies, more than one, ideally in the past, have been super useful to me. Like Vinny Lingham is a guy that comes to mind. Like, dude has built several different businesses, and I can like text him and he'll text me back like right away with help, valuable advice, clear cut advice, even if it's stuff that he knows I don't want to hear, but he's going to give me the right direction. So yeah, I just, if you're a founder out there, you're looking to bring people into your capital, what Diego is saying is really important consideration when you're evaluating who to let into your round. So we're getting to the top of the show here, and what have I not asked you that I should have asked that you wanted to talk about? That's my last question.
Maybe some spicy takes.
I would love some spicy takes that are going to go viral on social media. Let's go.
All right. Here we go.
All right.
I may regret this. No, in all seriousness, I think vast majority of the industry is middle curving Solana and next generation blockchains. They don't think scalability and performance matters because they're fundamentally misunderstanding how better infrastructure leads to better applications. I will also say that there's a massive amount of bag bias in the space to the point that billion-dollar investors are completely blinded by their bags and unable to see reality when it's directly in front of their eyes. And all of this is contributing to a historic and asymmetric investment opportunity in next generation blockchains, which we intend to take full advantage of.
I love it. Yeah. And for people listening, like bag blindness, it just means you own a lot of that asset. Like you own a ton of ETH, for example. And so all you see or pay attention to are a project on ETH, and you're kind of blinded by the fact that you're so incentivized financially to keep investing in that space, which is all like, look, it's understandable. It's a hard thing not to do. But I think you're right. I think that people who are not looking in the direction that you're looking are going to miss out. So kudos to you and best of luck. And thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Alex.